piece is entitled Libya Conflict Analysis, 3rd of October. What will come next? Historical factors and emerging power structures. My name is Alexander Hagan. I am a former research engineer for a telecommunications laboratory. I filed several patents. I'm a former financial analyst and financial reporter. I'm currently the CEO of a small, medium-sized tech company in Silicon Valley. That is my credibility. The analysis I'm doing uses at least 2 credible sources for each statement. They are not loosely researched opinions. They are double verified, indisputable facts. I've spent 700 hours researching and publishing information regarding the Libya conflict. I cite as my primary historical reference A History of Modern Libya, a series of interviews by the Real News with the chair of the Political Science Department at the University of New England, Professor Ali Ahmida, who is a friend of Jalil, the most respected of the leaders in the Transitional National Council. This professor is not a supporter of the Gaddafi Jamahiriya, but he does describe both sides. If you watch this 45-minute program in 3 parts, you may learn a great deal. Additionally, the writing of David Kirkpatrick of the New York Times, Andrew Gilliam of the UK Telegraph, and David Mackenzie of CNN, as well as digital journals Katerina Nicholas. In order to determine what the possible outcomes are, we need to look at the history first. First, let me say that no Arab country has had organic parliamentary democracy, with one exception. Iran had an election in the 1950s, but the Socialist Mozadegh was elected, and the US and Britain organized a coup, installing Shah Reza Pahlavi, who was brought down in an uprising in 1979, as we all remember. The reformists and students and communists were quickly disappointed when Ayatollah Khomeini destroyed the democratic movement, installing a ruling council who had to approve any candidate before they could stand for election. The students who were not religious zealots, along with the reformists and communists, were persecuted and occasionally tortured. Now, to Libya itself. We'll start in 1913. In 1913, Italy invaded Libya under Fascist Italy of Benito Mussolini, and 1/3 of all Libyans were killed by the Italians. They were killed by being put largely in concentration camps near Sirte and died in droves due to lack of clean water and so forth. Ironically, this is what is happening today in Sirte, except the city of Sirte is being attacked overhead by Nato, even dropping fragmentation bombs in a much more indiscriminate bombing than has been elsewhere credibly reported. People in Sirte, a city of between 75,000 and 125,000, could not even go to the hospital due to the shelling by the TNC rebels and NATO bombardment. Children have been shredded and blown to bits. However, after much international condemnation, the International Committee of the Red Cross has been allowed into Sirte by the TNC, thankfully. There was a 2-day truce called. They stopped their blockade of humanitarian assistance. NATO is claiming they will get out of Libya within a week or 2 and leave the TNC to finish the job. In reference to the Italian occupation of Libya, the most legendary of the early Libyans to conduct a guerrilla hit-and-run campaign against the Italians was Omar Mukhtar, who was hung by the Italians. To be fair, also, King Idris was also a hero of the resistance. In 1969, a group of 12 young officers staged a coup against King Idris, who was considered a corrupt monarchist, a Western puppet, or very much under the Western dictates. And he suspended the parliament in 1959 that favored the east of Libya, that Benghazi and Cyrenaica, to the detriment of Tripolitania and the west, a much more modern and populous region. This coup was very popular. The young officers kicked the Western powers out of Libya, freeing themselves of the yoke of colonialist domination, nationalizing their oil industry and embarking on an energetic campaign to build all of Libya's infrastructure, although the East was often the last in line, though the whole country was built up. Education increased from a small fraction of the population to the majority, and Gaddafi himself said his family would live in a tent until all Libyans had a home, a clever populist maneuver, although it was in fact true. Finally, in the early 80s, this was achieved and his parents were given a house. In 1975, the Young Officers' Council of 12 split evenly, with Gaddafi's side prevailing. Gaddafi developed a very unusual political philosophy called direct democracy, or the Third International Theory, wherein local councillors were supposed to be able to have total control of their political affairs, eliminating national elections, which he believed were always subverted by power structures. He supported all liberation movements around the world: Nelson Mandela, the PLO, the IRA, freedom fighters, and armed revolutionaries, including what we call terrorist groups today, but also some groups legitimately fighting corrupt and oppressive governments. This earned Libya a lot of enemies, as few of these groups actually succeeded in overthrowing the governments they opposed. He invested heavily in Africa and followed the Islamic tradition of providing zero-interest loans, and beyond Islamic requirements often had them undated, meaning that you could pay them off any time. In 1985, Reagan bombed Benghazi and Tripoli in retaliation for 2 or 3 American servicemen being killed in a Berlin nightclub bombing. Gaddafi allegedly retaliated by having a Pan Am jet blown up, as we all recall, and severe sanctions followed. Libya was now isolated. After Bush's invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, Gaddafi and his government gave in to the West and followed the West's demands to liberalize, creating unemployment for the first time and selling state enterprises to international corporations. At this time, corruption began to set in. In 1995, a prison uprising occurred, and 1,200 Islamic radicals from the Libya fighting group were killed by the security forces, which is about 1 in every 6,000 Libyans. It was the families of these martyrs that drove the protest of February 17th. The more populous and cosmopolitan west of Libya was favored, and many of the larger tribes were closely allied with Gaddafi, and some would call this a patronage system, where Gaddafi attempted to eliminate tribalism, but finally began to master it. 2 of these tribes alone comprised nearly 1/3 of Libya's population. The people of the south of Libya, who were predominantly black, were also favored, with large investments in modernization made in Saba, the chief city of Fezzan, the southernmost state of Libya. There are 3 primary states: Fezzan, Tripolitania, and Cyrenaica, 3, I believe, governorates, although they may be broken down further than that. At the time of the rebellion, which was put down violently by Gaddafi, Jamahiriya, with around 400 killed, the Mizrata tribe and the Obeidi tribes, along with others, opposed Gaddafi and still do. The Warfala also turned against Gaddafi. The Warfala comprised nearly 1 million of the 6 million Libyans. But most Libyans not active in the armed element of the rebellion became sympathetic as NATO forces began its campaign of bombing, killing about half the young men and women serving in the Libyan armed forces, around 15,000 people. The clan system of Libya would suppose that at least 10 people would be affected directly in the immediate family of each of these of young servicemen and women killed. Therefore, we're looking at 150,000 Libyans who had family members killed, uncles and aunts, cousins, children, grandparents. So beyond that, you have a clan structure which would be affected by this. And you might be looking at 1 million Libyans who would be alienated from the rebellion due to the NATO bombing. In addition, the largely false rumor of African mercenaries fueled lynching of black construction workers. That would alienate several 100,000 Libyans who are black. Additionally, as the rebellion's military wing were jihadists that had fought NATO in Iraq, many women rallied around the Libyan government, as women had equal rights in the socialist Jamahiriya Gaddafi built. Technically, by the way, Gaddafi resigned from government in 1978, becoming a sort of national mentor instead. Of course, most would say he actually tightly controlled the government until the present day. We can estimate that perhaps 10% of the Libyans were women, fearful of jihadi Islamist Sharia law, requiring them to get out of their pants and into burqas, out of their universities to serve instead in the home. This would probably be around 600,000 women. Additionally, 900,000 Libyans worked in the government, and many of these were pro-Gaddafi once NATO began bombing. Not counted elsewhere, we can say at least another 100,000. The key issue here is the NATO bombing. Many Libyans were tired of waiting for Libya to be re-energized waiting and waiting and waiting at long promised reforms. However, once NATO began to heavily militarily intervene, it is clear and indisputable that support rallied for the sitting government. The two largest tribes, and many other tribes, the majority of women and blacks, then could be said to have rallied around their leader, as their former colonial masters armed the jihadists to overthrow a secular, though repressive, government. The other wing of the effective fighting forces of the rebels were the Berber, an ancient people living south of the populous coast in the western mountains, also called the Nafusa Mountains. Looking at this constellation of factors and their allegiances, it is clear that more Libyans supported Gaddafi's Jamahiriya than the rebellion. I do not see how any decent researcher could come to any other conclusion. Additionally, the rebels' chief, General Yunus, was assassinated by the jihadists for his role in the prison massacre of 1995, which has caused some effect on his tribe, the Obeidi, who are in the far east in Tobruk. Libya, though a police state, had the highest standard of living and longevity in Africa and most of the Middle East, similar to Argentina or even Chile according to the UN Human Development Index, due to its oil wealth and its use to be reinvested. And as a police state, it had a surprisingly low number of prisoners, only 10,000, as opposed to the US's 2 million, about 1/4 of our incarceration rate. They also had 1/3 of our death rate generally. To be 1/3 as likely to die on a given day in Libya than in the United States prior to the uprising. The reason the rebels were successful was NATO's complete obliteration of the Libyan Navy, Air Force, and Army. The invasion of Tripoli was spearheaded by special forces of the NATO countries and Qataris, and the present military commander of Tripoli, Belhaj, was a good friend of what we call Al-Qaeda. Imagine 7,000 batteries of missiles and 2,000-pound bombs dropped on the capital of your state for 5 months, followed by the rounding up of anyone who supported your government and imprisonment of them, and attacks on ethnic groups, including their killing, fueled by propaganda. As we used to say during the Cold War, he might be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch. The NATO countries' media outlets have suddenly discovered that some Islamists are good guys ready to embrace democracy. This about-face would never have happened if the jihadis had opposed this extremely muscular display of firepower, the NATO intervention. It is in fact astonishing that even with the combined might of all the Allied powers, air forces, and navies and special forces, the loyalists are still fighting on at least a dozen fronts and hold 2 provincial capitals, Beni Walid and Sirte, and 1 governorate capital, Sabah. Libya, under the TNC, has conducted mass arrests of those suspected of opposing them, and there are now more political prisoners in prison in Libya, more than 10,000, than all of the common prisoners all of the total prisoners in Libya prior to the rebellion. These suspected loyalists are being tortured, and I would maintain that this is all attributable to one simple factor about our intervention, that instead of thinking, we killed, we bombed. In terms of alienating Libyans, it makes no difference whether the majority of people killed by NATO were civilians or not. They all had families. All of these families lost family members. It is therefore obvious that the TNC government will be in a civil war for years. Libyans are not the type of people to forget these atrocities. They're tribal clan societies. If the killing of 1,200 people in 1995 formed the basis for this rebellion, what will the killing and lynching and mistreatment of women and blacks, loyalists, government employees, numbering into the hundreds of thousands do? Instead of thinking, we arrogantly exerted every violent and illegal act imaginable against Gaddafi, who had insulted the despots of the Arabian Peninsula, as well as the Western former colonial powers, by nationalizing their oil companies in 1969. If the goal was to destabilize Africa and shatter the psychic health of Libyan families through driving enormous wedges between groups, then we have succeeded in Libya. The TNC will begin at some point to provide patronage to some of these alienated groups, or they will create a police state, much worse than Gaddafi's, as they are publicly stating they will punish anyone who formerly supported Gaddafi. Of course, they do not say this in the international press, but loyalists realize they must stay very quiet or risk arrest or even execution or torture. It is a witch hunt, except it is a witch hunt for all members of one side of a civil war, which, though initially unknown as to its levels of support, certainly several large cities and tribes opposed Gaddafi, it became a civil war due to foreign intervention. My main references proving that loyalists are being arrested, harassed, silenced, lynched, and ethnically cleansed, for example, in the city of Tawarga, at any rate, are the New York Times and the UK Telegraph.